What if I told you that waiting until you actually feel like you, quote unquote, need a therapist is the exact reason therapy ends up taking a full year instead of just like 4 weeks?
I mean, it's the ultimate irony of our modern approach to mental health, right? We treat intervention as a last resort,
Right.
and that practically guarantees the intervention will be long, arduous, and, just far more complicated than it ever needed to be.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a really fascinating framework today, specifically some operational notes, case studies, and models from coping and healing counseling, or CHC.
Yeah, they operate a telehealth service.
Yeah.
And the core mission of examining their model today is to completely dismantle this culturally ingrained idea that therapy is only for emergencies.
Exactly. We're going to look at the sociology of why we delay care, the actual biological cost of that delay, and the logistical friction that keeps people out of the system.
Because we really do need to rethink this. Treating mental health as an everyday preventative practice isn't just like a nice idea.
Right.
From a psychological and physiological standpoint, it is arguably one of the most underrated, highly effective interventions available to us right now.
I was actually thinking about how we treat our brains compared to how we treat our computers or, our smartphones.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. Because when your phone starts lagging, you don't wait for the battery to catch fire before you look at what's going on.
Oh, you don't.
You close out the background apps, you clear the cache, you free up the RAM so the processor can actually do its job.
Yep.
But with our mental health, we refuse to close those background apps. We let the stress, the unresolved grief, life transitions, we just let them run silently in the background, draining our battery.
And we assume that because the screen hasn't gone completely black yet, that, well, everything is fine.
Exactly. We wait for the total crash.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. Those background apps represent cognitive load. And if we want to fix this tendency to ignore the lag until the system crashes, we really have to examine the psychology of why we wait.
Which is what we see in the CHC notes, right?
Yeah, the data and the case notes we're looking at highlight this pervasive social myth. Basically, society has conditioned us to believe we need a quote-unquote good enough reason to seek professional help.
We have this imaginary threshold. It's like there's an invisible bouncer at the door of the clinic checking to see if your trauma is heavy enough to warrant a session.
Right. If you're not in crisis, you don't get past the velvet rope.
But looking at the CHC framework, they list these seemingly small triggers that are actually critical indicators that it's time to talk to someone. Do you know what the most common one is?
It's the fatigue one, isn't it?
Yeah. Simply, I'm tired and I don't know why.
Which, I should point out, is a profound clinical indicator, not just a casual complaint.
Wow, really? Just being tired.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, there are others on their list too. Things like, I want to grow, or I just need a thinking partner.
Yeah, those are huge.
Or struggling with a life transition, like a new baby, a new job, a move, even snapping at your partner or your kids more than usual.
Right, or processing grief that just seems to be lingering a little too long. Or working through old childhood patterns that keep popping up.
But to the average person listening, these just sound like Tuesday. They sound like the normal friction of being a human.
And that's exactly the problem. Because we have normalized living in a state of low-level nervous system dysregulation.
Dysregulation. Okay, break that down for me.
Take the example you just mentioned, snapping at your kids. We dismiss it. We tell ourselves, oh, I just didn't sleep well, or, work is just busy right now.
Right. We always have an excuse for it.
Exactly. We don't recognize that chronic irritability is very often a symptom of an overloaded nervous system.
So the background apps are draining the battery again.
Precisely. Your brain is trying to process a lingering grief or a difficult life transition, using up all that metaphorical RAM, which means you have literally zero emotional bandwidth left for a spilled glass of milk at the dinner table.
Okay, I track the logic there, but I do want to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because I am struggling with the resource allocation aspect of this whole concept, we are constantly hearing about a mental health crisis in this country, right?
Oh, well.
We hear about waitlist, burned out practitioners, a severe lack of access. So if I go into a clinic because I just want to grow or because I'm looking for a thinking partner to optimize my career transition, aren't I literally bumping someone who is severely depressed, someone in an active crisis down the wait list?
I hear that all the time. It is a very common concern, but it relies on a fundamental misunderstanding of public health models and how clinical triage actually works.
Really? How so?
It assumes a scarcity mindset, like it's a finite pie where your slice means someone in a crisis starves. But structurally, it's the exact opposite.
Prove it to me,
Oh,
because mathematically, if there are 10 slots and I take one for quote-unquote growth, there are only 9 left for a crisis.
okay, let's look at the life cycle of a crisis. High acuity crisis care, so we're talking inpatient facilities, emergency psychiatric interventions, intensive outpatient programs that is incredibly resource heavy.
Okay, right. That makes sense.
It requires massive amounts of time, specialized staff, and immediate intervention. By normalizing growth-oriented, non-crisis therapy, you are engaging in preventative maintenance.
Oh, I think I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, you are processing that lingering grief or marital stress now in a lower acuity setting, which prevents you from escalating into a full-blown crisis 2 years down the line.
Oh, wow. So I'm essentially keeping myself out of the intensive care unit, which is where the real bottleneck in the system is.
Precisely. You aren't stealing a spot from someone in crisis. You are actively ensuring you don't become another high acuity crisis that requires 10 times the clinical resources to stabilize.
That is responsible health management, honestly.
Exactly. When populations engage in preventative care, the overall burden on the entire medical system actually drops.
Okay, that reframes it entirely for me. But let's say we still invalidate our small reasons. We play the martyr.
Which we love to do.
We really do. We decide we don't need a thinking partner. We can tough it out. We just let the background apps run. What is the actual tangible cost of that delay?
Well, the CHC case notes present a pretty stark mathematical reality regarding that.
Right, the snowball effect. The data shows that because most people wait until something fundamentally cracks to seek help, what could have been handled in just 4 sessions turns into a full year of therapeutic repair.
Yeah, it's the transition from a situational stressor to a total systemic collapse.
Yeah.
And we have to look at the biology of why 4 sessions morphs into 52.
Okay, let's get into the biology. What's happening in the body?
When you delay processing a stressor, your body remains in a state of allostatic load.
Allostatic load.
Yes, that's the physiological wear and tear on the body from chronic stress. Your cortisol levels just stay elevated.
And cortisol is the stress hormone.
Right. And that elevated cortisol disrupts your sleep architecture, specifically your REM sleep, which is when your brain typically processes emotional data.
Oh, wait. So because you aren't processing the emotion while you're awake, it ruins the sleep that is supposed to process it at night.
Exactly. It is a vicious biological feedback loop.
Wow.
The original stressors say a difficult new job starts compounding. The lack of REM sleep affects your emotional regulation.
Which leads to conflict with your spouse.
Yes, which creates marital anxiety, which further spikes your cortisol. By the time you finally sit down with a therapist a year later, they aren't just treating the stress of a new job anymore.
No, they're treating the collateral damage. They're treating a damaged marriage, clinical insomnia, and severe burnout.
Yes, the malware has spread to the entire operating system. And there is a specific symptom of this snowball effect highlighted in the clinical notes that is incredibly telling.
Oh, I know the one. Feeling exhausted in ways that rest simply doesn't fix.
That's the one.
That line stopped me in my tracks when I read it. Exhausted in ways rest doesn't fix. I think you, listening right now, probably know exactly what that feels like.
This is very common.
You can sleep for 10 hours, wake up, and still feel completely depleted. It's like your bones are tired.
Because the exhaustion isn't physical, it is cognitive and emotional. Your brain requires immense amounts of metabolic energy to continuously suppress unaddressed emotional weight.
Just to hold it down.
Right. It is physically exhausting to keep your composure when your nervous system is sounding a low-level alarm all day. Sleep will rest your muscles, but it will not turn off that alarm.
Only processing the underlying issue does that.
Exactly. And that is why the delay costs you a year.
Okay, so we've mapped out the cost of waiting. The background apps drain the battery, the allostatic load disrupts your sleep, and a 4-week fix turns into a year-long excavation.
Yeah, it's a mess.
But even if you realize this, even if you decide today, okay, I'm going to book an appointment before the crash, there is a second massive psychological wall we hit.
Oh, definitely.
And it's the pressure of the medical model. We feel this intense pressure to walk into a professional's office already knowing exactly what is wrong with us.
Yeah, the burden of diagnosis.
Right.
We are conditioned by traditional medicine to present a neatly defined symptom. You go to an orthopedic doctor and say, my right knee hurts when I walk upstairs.
You've localized the problem for them.
Exactly. And we expect mental health to work the exact same way.
We feel like we have to hand the therapist a perfectly wrapped package of our trauma with, like, a diagnosis written on the tag.
Yeah, but the notes we're analyzing make it explicitly clear. Clients absolutely do not need a diagnosis to begin therapy.
Which is so relieving to hear.
Walking into a session and simply stating, something's off, I don't know what, is a complete, valid, and highly common starting point.
So it's not on me to figure it out first.
Not at all.
Mm.
It is entirely the professional's job to figure out the what and the why, not the client's.
I have to admit, though, stripping away the medical model feels incredibly vulnerable. To show up empty-handed to a stranger, essentially saying, "Hi, my life just feels sort of heavy and gray. Figure me out." I mean, it feels like you aren't doing your part.
It does feel intimidating.
But like you're going to fail therapy before you even start because you don't have the vocabulary for what's wrong.
That vulnerability is very real, but it comes from backwards engineering the therapeutic process in our minds.
What do you mean?
Well, we think therapy is a performance where the client presents the data and the therapist grades it. But look at how the early sessions are actually structured.
Okay, what do the first few sessions look like?
The first 1 to 2 sessions are essentially a biopsychosocial assessment. But it doesn't feel like a sterile medical exam. It's a collaborative discovery.
So what does that actually look like in practice? If I just walk in and say, "I'm tired," what are they doing?
They are mapping out your environment, your history, your somatic cues, like where you hold tension in your body and your current stressors. They are establishing a baseline.
So they're just gathering the puzzle pieces.
Right. They might ask about your routines, your relationships, how you handle conflict. They are trained to listen to the spaces between your words, to identify patterns that you are just too close to see.
Oh, that's incredibly freeing.
The pressure is completely off of you. Your only job is to show up and be honest. The licensed professional brings the flashlight into that gray heaviness and starts illuminating the paths.
Your only job is to show up. I love that. And that brings us perfectly to the logistical reality of modern care. Let's pivot to the behavioral economics of this.
Let's do it.
Because even if you clear the mental hurdles, you accept you don't need a crisis, you accept you don't need a diagnosis, historically, the physical friction of just getting to therapy was enough to stop people entirely.
Oh, friction is the enemy of preventative care. In behavioral economics, we know that every additional step required to access a service exponentially increases the drop-off rate.
Which is where coping and healing counseling CHC comes in as the prime case study in this material. Their model is essentially a masterclass in erasing logistical friction to facilitate early intervention.
It really is.
Let's analyze their team structure first, because they highlight having a diverse, culturally competent team of over 15 licensed therapists, and they use an alphabet soup of credentials that I want us to define for everyone listening.
Okay, sure.
We're talking LCSWs, LPCs, and LMFTs. What is the actual functional difference between these?
It's important to understand because it shows the breadth of the safety net here. An LCSW is a licensed clinical social worker.
Okay.
They are highly trained in understanding an individual within their broader environment, so how social systems, economic factors, and community resources impact mental health.
Got it. And an LPC.
That's a licensed professional counselor. Their training is intensely focused on cognitive and emotional processing, individual psychology, and behavioral interventions.
Okay, so LCSW is a bit more systems focused, LPC is more individual cognitive focused. What about the LMFT?
Licensed marriage and family therapist. They view issues through a relational lens. Even if they are treating an individual, they are analyzing how family dynamics, generational patterns, and relationships contribute to the client's current state.
Ah, okay.
So by having all three under one roof, alongside life coaches, a clinic can address virtually any angle of an issue, from generalized anxiety and trauma to navigating a divorce or managing workplace stress.
And they work with individuals, couples, families, and teens from ages 13 and up. So the clinical breadth is definitely there.
Yeah, the safety net is wide.
But here is where the behavioral economics come into play and where the friction is actively removed. CHC serves all 159 counties in Georgia through a 100% telehealth high PA compliant model.
And honestly, telehealth is perhaps the greatest structural shift in preventative mental health in a century.
Really? You think it's that big of a deal?
Absolutely. By removing the geographic and physical barriers, you disrupt the typical delay tactics the brain uses to avoid vulnerability.
Think about the traditional model. You have to secure an hour for the appointment, plus like 45 minutes of commuting and rush hour traffic on either side.
Yeah, finding a parking spot.
Exactly. You have to find a clinic within driving distance that actually takes your insurance. You have to sit awkwardly in a waiting room reading an old magazine, hoping you don't make eye contact with a coworker.
The waiting room anxiety is real.
And you might even have to scramble to find childcare. That is an enormous amount of logistical friction just to get in the door.
It is entirely prohibitive for someone who is just seeking a thinking partner or feeling mildly burned out. They will look at that logistical mountain and say, you know what? Never mind. My problem isn't big enough to warrant this much effort.
Exactly. But when the clinic is in your living room or your home office, those excuses vanish. The CHC data shows their intake process takes about 10 minutes online.
10 minutes, that's nothing.
You fill out a secure form, and their model usually gets you a first virtual appointment within the exact same week.
Which is critical for momentum. When someone finally makes the decision to seek help, having to wait 6 weeks for an opening allows the motivation to dissipate and the symptoms to worsen.
Right, you talk yourself out of it.
Exactly. A 1-week turnaround capitalizes on the client's readiness for change.
It's the difference between saying, well, I'll start eating healthy next month versus having a healthy meal placed right in front of you today.
Yes.
The physical friction is gone. But obviously, we have to talk about the financial friction because that is the ultimate gatekeeper in American healthcare.
It really is.
Time and travel are one thing, but if it costs $200 out of pocket every Tuesday, preventative care remains a luxury for the wealthy.
Financial accessibility is the linchpin. A telehealth model that removes physical friction is completely useless if the economic friction remains high.
And this is where the CHC data gets really interesting regarding accessibility. They provide the exact financials. For Medicaid, there is a $0 copay. Zero. It is entirely covered.
That is massive.
And for major insurances, let's see, they list Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, and Humana. The out-of-pocket cost usually ranges from just $10 to $40 a session.
We really need to contextualize those numbers. $10 to $40. That fundamentally shifts therapy from a major financial burden into a standard, affordable routine.
Right, it's accessible.
For many, that is the cost of a few coffees or ordering a single takeout meal. When the financial barrier is lowered to that degree, engaging in preventative mental maintenance becomes an accessible reality rather than a privilege.
It really does. And if you are in Georgia and you're curious about how this specific infrastructure works, you can actually look at their setup at gctherapy.com or drop them an email at support@gctherapy.com or even call them, it's 404-832-0102.
But looking at it purely as a logistical ecosystem, it is designed flawlessly for early intervention.
It really is.
You take away the stigma of needing a crisis by normalizing the small reasons. You take away the pressure of needing a diagnosis by embracing collaborative discovery.
Right.
You take away the commute and geographic limits with telehealth. And you drastically reduce the financial barrier with Medicaid and major insurance integration.
It leaves the individual with essentially no structural obstacles. You are just left with yourself, a secure video link, and a trained professional ready to help you untangle those background apps draining your energy.
Yeah, there's nowhere left to hide.
In
a good way.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does this all mean for you listening right now? What is the core takeaway from dissecting this model of care? The absolute headline here is that you do not need a breakdown to get a breakthrough.
That is the essential paradigm shift right there.
Whether you just want a thinking partner to map out your career, whether you're dealing with the stress of a new environment, or whether you are experiencing that deep, heavy exhaustion that a full weekend of sleep simply cannot fix.
Yeah.
Even if you just know deep down that something is off, that is a complete sentence. That is reason enough. And by addressing it now, closing those background apps before the system crashes, you are saving yourself the year of repair that comes from waiting for the allostatic load to break you down.
And, that leads to a lingering thought regarding our overall potential.
Okay, what's that?
We spend so much cultural energy discussing how to get back to normal after a crisis. We focus on healing from trauma, recovering from burnout, just getting back to baseline.
Right, baseline is always the goal.
But if we actually embraced this model of preventative therapy, if we utilized a regular thinking partner to help us process the low-level friction of daily life before it compounds, how much higher could our baseline of happiness actually be?
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating question. What if our normal is actually just high-functioning burnout?
Precisely. We are so accustomed to our everyday, low-level hum of stress. The dysregulated sleep, the mild irritability, the brain fog, that we think that is just the human condition.
We just accept it.
We do. We might not even realize how light, how clear, and how focused life could feel if we simply freed up the cognitive resources we're currently using to suppress our unaddressed stress.
It's like we're all walking around with 100-pound backpacks, convinced that gravity is just really strong today, instead of realizing we can just set the bag down.
That's a perfect analogy.
It is entirely possible to clear the cache, defragment the hard drive, and experience a smooth, responsive operating system. You just have to stop waiting for the crash to finally call tech support.